Aloha, my name is Jody Kunimitsu. I am the chair of HSTA's Human and Civil Rights Committee, and I'm also a math teacher at Maui High School. This session is being coordinated by HSTA's SHINE program and Human and Civil Rights Committee. SHINE stands for Supporting Hawaii's New Educators and was created to support members who are new to teaching or new to our state. One of the ways we do this is through our Office Hours series, which consists of online seminars that cover a variety of topics, like today's session on ʻāina Aloha, but can also address topics like financial education, home ownership, and more. You'll see our second logo says HSTA CARES. CARES stands for Culture, Advocacy, Respect, Equity, and Support. And it is a new initiative being rolled out by our Human and Civil Rights Committee. Our goal is to encourage our HSTA members to become true advocates of racial and social justice in Hawaii. We want to integrate these principles into education to create schools and communities that are safe, inclusive, and equitable for all keiki. Today, we are focusing on the C in CARES, which stands for culture. We know Hawaii is a unique, diverse community, and Hawaiian culture is woven intricately into our surroundings and our way of life. Whether you were born and raised in Hawaii or moved here, as educators of this ʻāina, it is important that we create learning opportunities for our students to connect to the unique culture of our island home. At this time, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Kuʻulei Makua. Kuʻulei works in the Department of Education, Office of Hawaiian Education. She was going to be a presenter at the HSTA Social Justice Summit this past spring, which had to be canceled due to COVID. We appreciate that Kuʻulei has graciously agreed to share this presentation with all of you today. Aloha, Kuʻulei.
Thank you, Jody, for that introduction, and thank you too to HSTA for inviting me to be a part of these office hours and the opportunity to share with you teachers across our ʻāina. I am, as it was shared, Kuʻulei Makua, daughter of Wayne Kuroda and Glenna Kalilikane, and I was born and raised in Kaimuki, Oahu, and I'm coming to you today live and virtually from where I currently live in Waimanalo. I want to be able to also hear who's with us in the room, and so I've designed intentionally for us to be able to share a little bit about myself in this intro, and then in our next activity for you to share a little bit about yourself. I also take this time to pause and introduce you all to my daughters, Hazel, Bella, and Lily, and I give them recognition here as throughout this next hour, we'll be using our time to share and exchange mo'olelo or stories. And the stories that I share will be our experiences that we've had as a ohana, and so I introduce them here. The design of today might feel like an inhale and an exhale. We'll have time where I'll share some information mixed with storytelling. And then I also want to be able to hear from all of you. And so we'll be using some technology in different ways to help us do this. While I may not be able to hear your leo, your voices, or see all of your faces as I share my screen and slides with you today, I want to begin by using the chat feature of Zoom to kahea or call all of us to this collective shared space. If you would in the chat, please call out 3 mana'o, your inoa or name, your school and organization, and your role. And I understand that these office hours have been opened up to community. And so if you're not joining us with a DOE affiliation, please share your role and your community affiliation. And lastly, the name of your ʻāina. ʻāina Aloha honors that each of us are shaped by our environments. And so please share the name of your ʻāina. It might be the place that you're joining us from currently, or it could be your one hanau or your birthplace, or it might even be the place in which you find rejuvenation. And so if we could turn on your chat, you can begin to type in your 3 mana'o. Take a moment to see who else is joining us and where everyone else is joining us from, and the ʻāina and the places that they bring with us today. I humbly represent this work on behalf, there's a helicopter flying over me. I'm sorry. I humbly represent this work on behalf of the Office of Hawaiian Education, or OHE. and the Hawaiian Studies program today. In our work within the DOE, our role as an office is to ground education in Hawaiian ways of knowing so that all of Hawaii may thrive. It is our belief that when we do for Hawaii, our ʻāina, we do for all, and we all thrive. This is our agenda for today. Again, as I said earlier, we will be doing storytelling throughout our day. I'll share the mo'olelo of ʻāina Aloha and why and how it came to be as a part of our DOE system. And as we dive deeper into the concepts and kumuhana or topics within ʻāina Aloha, I'll show stories and invite you to share stories of how we've experienced or might design for ʻāina Aloha during this time of the pandemic via virtual and or blended learning. I also want to introduce menti.com as a tool in addition to the chat as a way for us to virtually exchange and share these mo'olelo or ask questions or wonderings during this time. So if you have a mobile device or if you open up another tab in your window and you go to menti.com, you'll be able to see a prompt. And the prompt will ask you what mana'o thoughts or questions you might have. And as you post them here, they'll populate here on this screen and we'll be able to use this kind of as a virtual whiteboard or chart paper, if you will, as our parking lot for today, but also as a platform for us to share stories. And so as you might listen to the presentation today and if experience might be resonating in your na'au that you're shouting out and are calling to you and they want to be shared, I invite you to share via Menti and or using the chat feature of Zoom. ʻāina Aloha allows us to strengthen our connection to place via ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, Kuʻuʻei, and Honua. And as we get ready to learn more about ʻāina Aloha's mo'olelo, I'd like you all to consider how might connection to place impact teaching and learning. So using the breakout room feature of Zoom, I'm going to ask Terry to help me break you all into groups of 4, and you'll have about 3 minutes, which is a little bit less than 1 person per minute, to share and to answer this prompt. How might connection to place impact teaching and learning? When you get into your breakout room, please, of course, introduce yourself to the others in the room. Share your mana'o regarding this question. And as you share, please think about or listen for the commonalities that are coming across from all of the stories. And as you find those commonalities, put those words in the chat or put them in our Menti so that when we come back to the large room, even though we may not have been able to be a part of your small room conversations, we'll get a sense of all of the conversations, of what was happening rather, in all of the conversations. Aloha, welcome back everyone from your breakout rooms. I know that we were right in our conversations. It didn't feel like enough time, but luckily we've designed for some time today throughout for us to continue sharing. Thank you for those of you who are putting in the Menti or in the chat some of the commonalities that you saw come out in those conversations. It looks like someone had a question around how did we as a Native people or here as island people handle the Spanish flu as a way to look back and see what can we learn from what our ancestors did. People, it seems like they talked a lot about place, maybe shaping identity and the ability to think about how ʻāina connects us to those ideas of sustainability. And then it also looks like people were having conversations around the connections between place and nahopena'a'o, or the framework that tells us the importance of creating learning environments for our students that lead to those ha outcomes. Mahalo. We really look back to our traditional models of a'o, or teaching and learning, to see what we can learn from our kupuna. And in Ahupua systems, we know that teaching and learning was embedded in one's nohona, or way of living, and in our language and in our culture. Learning was meaningful and purposeful in order to sustain and provide for the physical, spiritual, and emotional well-being of our communities. And there was no separation between what we lived and what we learned. Our kupuna were ʻāina literate. They could read our environment. ʻAʻohe pau ka ike I ka halau hoʻokahi. Learning was not confined to one source of knowledge or one place of learning. Our kupuna had intimate, personal, deep connections and relationships with the ʻāina. They understood the systems, cycles, rhythms, patterns, movements, and breathing of our ʻāina and kai. And as we move towards the 1820 with the arrival of missionaries and the introduction of print or written language, our kupuna were able to transfer those literacy skills they mastered by reading our environment to print literacy. And by 1834, there was a 91 to 95% literacy rate in the Hawaiian Kingdom. In 1840, Kamehameha Ekolu Kauikeauli establishes our first public education system. From 1840 and the establishment of our public education system, there were several events in our history that have caused the intentional disconnects of Hawaiian language and culture we currently experience in some of our educational system. We see the overthrow of our Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893, the banning and punishment of our kupuna for speaking ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi in public and private schools, and the annexation of Hawaii in 1898. Teaching and learning shifts from being a part of our nohona and is no longer connected to our language and our culture. We see a shift in learning environments moving from learning from and on our ʻāina and in our communities to schoolhouses and within classrooms. With the Hawaiian Renaissance of the 1970s, we experienced a resurgence and a pride in our language and culture, an advocacy that leads to the establishment of programs such as Hawaiian Studies and Papahana Kaiapuni or Hawaiian Language Immersion Schools in our public education system. In 2015, in addition to the amendment of our Hawaiian Studies Program Board Policy, the Office of Hawaiian Education is also established. Naho Pena'a'o is passed as an E3 policy. And our board of, Naho Pena'a'o is passed as an E3 policy. And in response to the board policy amendments and the creation of OHE, Hawaiian Studies Program begins the development of ʻāina Aloha. I want to call out here, and a lot of you are already making the connection between ʻāina Aloha and Naho Pena'a'o, the relationship between ʻāina Aloha and Ha. Ha is about context or the creation of learning environments that lead to a strengthened sense of belonging, responsibility, excellence, aloha, total well-being, and Hawaii for all of our DOE stakeholders. ʻāina Aloha provides content that allows us to reconnect to ʻāina by designing for teaching and learning opportunities that are contextualized to our island home, Hawaii. Board Policy 105-7 calls for an incorporation of Hawaiian knowledge, practices, and perspectives in all content areas, and for students to have a proficiency in and appreciation for our indigenous culture, history, and language of Hawaii. And so by design and intentionally, ʻāina Aloha perpetuates the following methodology and epistemology. A'o, teaching and learning, happens all around us all day long. We need to move ourselves beyond the thinking of contemporary classroom spaces or four walls, back to designing for teaching and learning in multiple learning places, beyond just our schools, including our homes and our neighborhoods and communities. And by designing in this way, we reconnect and reacquaint ourselves to the ʻāina, that which feeds and sustains us physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. We must also redefine who we view as kumu and where we see our sources of knowledge, beyond just people and places such as our teachers. ʻāina is our best teacher, and we must open and humble ourselves to listen, to feel, to connect, and to watch what our environment will teach and share with us. Ohana and caregivers are our students' first teachers, and they too should be engaged as a part of the students' learning journeys. And in this digital age, where technology too can be a teacher or source of knowledge, let us leverage technology to help us become better stewards of our islands and to be ever mindful to balance our use of technology so students continue to feel connected to ʻāina and to others in order to strengthen their sense of ha in multiple learning spaces and from various learning sources. In the design of ʻāina Aloha, we convened community, internal and external to the DOE, private and public sector, to collaboratively design what it would eventually become, ʻāina Aloha. It was consistently communicated and discussed and validated that teachers have content standards, and we did not want to add one more thing to their plates. We also wanted to remain cognizant of the board policy of having an integration of culture, language, and history. And so to that end, ʻāina Aloha was developed in order to provide educators with a tool that strengthens pilina, relationships or connection to ʻāina, and roots content in Hawaiʻi to strengthen one's identity and sense of breath. Much like ha has the metaphor of breath, ʻāina Aloha has the metaphor of roots. And if we take that acronym of ʻaʻa, we can see that ʻaʻa can mean roots or veins, or it can mean womb or offspring. And so in that way, ʻāina Aloha helps us to recognize that our identities are grounded and shaped by the places that raise us. And by rooting our content to Hawaiʻi and contextualizing learning to Hawaiʻi, we strengthen our sense of ha and our ability to be stewards of our island home. Roots and veins serve the function of carrying nutrients or oxygen to plants or parts of our body. And in the same way, ʻaʻa serves to revitalize and reconnect all of our DOE stakeholders to our ʻāina. It also reminds us of our connectivity and that we sit in generations. So we mahalo our kupuna and remember our kuleana to leave a positive legacy for generations to come. ʻaʻa was developed around concepts so that teachers could continue to teach their content standards, and through the use of three concepts, ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, Hawaiian language, kuana ike, worldview, and honua, or place, they could contextualize or root their content to Hawaiʻi. Within the concepts of kuana ike and honua, there are sub-kumuhana or topics, such as Ahupua, Wahipana, Mahalo and Honihi, Pono, and Kuleana. We'll dive deeper into each of these in just a little bit. Each of these kumuhana or topics are designed around a learning cycle that reminds us, much like the growth of a kukui tree, there is no beginning and there is no end. Hua or seeds become kupu, who turn into liko, then pua, and back to hua, and the cycle repeats itself. We all, as teachers and students, enter this learning cycle at different places based on our ohana and our experiences and perspectives. That diversity is honored through this learning cycle that we borrow from the work of Dr. Keiki Kawaiʻaia and her work with Moana Ha. As we find ourselves in unprecedented times and are looking at different models of delivering instruction and assessment, we find ourselves with a great opportunity to hoʻi, or return to a connectivity for teaching and learning to our spaces and through our host language and culture. ʻāina Aloha offers us one way to think about leveraging our homes and communities as learning environments and seeking alternative kumu or sources of knowledge like ʻāina, ohana, and community. The first concept within ʻāina Aloha is ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi. I'm going to drop in the chat right after the next slide in case, I think it was sent, but in case you may not have got your PDF copy of your e-copy of our current draft of ʻāina Aloha. And so the first concept that we're going to talk about is ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi. And if you do have that e-copy, you'll find ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi on pages 5 and 6 of that document. ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi is definitely a cross-cutting concept. You're going to see ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi as a part of kuana ike and also a part of honua. Its usage is going to be dependent on the teacher and student readiness and where they find themselves comfortable entering that learning cycle. Olalo Hawaiʻi starts with an understanding of the significance and importance of language and ends in the hua stage and begins again as we start to deepen our understanding of how Olalo Hawaiʻi helps to shape our worldview. I said at the beginning that I was going to humbly share my family's personal experiences with ʻāina aloha, and then pause and allow you all some time to share your personal or professional experiences. And so as a ohana, one of the things that we saw was we were able to rethink and redesign some of the ways in which we were looking at education from the lens of being in our place and being at home with our keiki. Of my 3 girls, one of my girls attends an immersion school. She is my youngest daughter. And because of her immersion experience and ability to olalo Hawaiʻi, her worldview is being shaped by her connection to Hawaiian language. One day we were driving in the car and it began raining, and she asked me the name of the rain. And that sparked a conversation in our car that would not have happened if not for her asking that question and understanding the importance and the relationship that she has to her environment. As we were driving out to the west side that day, she recited the moku, the districts of Oahu, as we passed through, and excitedly explained to everyone as we're in Ewa, and I know that we're in Ewa because I see the red dirt, and I can see Pu'uloa, and she commented on the mo'olalo of Ahupua. And so in this way, when we experience Olalo Hawaiʻi as a ohana, she becomes the kumu and not the baby of our family. Her older sisters are able to learn from her, are able to listen to us and my husband speak in Olalo Hawaiʻi, pick up on the vocabulary words, understand the words, and start to build sentences on their own. You can also see here, as a result of that rain conversation, we built lupe and flew them in the limu lipu'upu'u winds in our yard in Waimanalo. I'm going to share a little bit later about the garden that in the mala that we've started during this time of the pandemic, and we've harvested olena. And in looking at the olena, we were able to identify the parts that we put back for regrowth, like the makua, made connections to our last name, to the idea that it means parent. So it's the part that goes back in the ground. And the parts of the olana that we harvest, like the mana, which are just like our fingers and our toes. And so we've taken in a lot of information and have done a lot of hanu. I'm going to take our first pause here, our first ha, and invite Elizabeth Chirac, who's a middle school teacher at Kea'au Middle School on Hawaii Island, to help us move through this process of sharing stories or answering questions briefly.
Hi, thank you, Ku'ulei. So there were a couple of things going on in the chat. I was hoping that you could help us figure out. Tempo asked about the kupuna program. She's part of it, and this was where we had some kupuna in every elementary school, and I guess it was a law at some point. Is that still in the law books?
Yeah, absolutely. As a part of our constitutional mandate, it says that the state shall provide for programming that includes Hawaiian language, history, and culture. For the past 40 years, kupuna component has been how we've delivered Hawaiian studies instruction for some of our K-6 elementary schools. And as we continue to design for Hawaiian studies implementation and instruction across a K-12 system, kupuna component will continue to be a model of delivery for K-6 schools that choose it. And we're also going to look to what we learn from that model to help us think about models for our secondary context.
Great, thanks. And I'll go ahead and give you a chance to answer some of the questions that you have on the Menti there.
Yeah. So it says here, there's some comments around how Native Hawaiian students make up the majority of our special education population. This is more of a comment, I think, and it reminds us of the importance to design learning around culture, blending hands-on learning with academic standards to engage and support these students. Absolutely. There's a comment here about Hawaiian language immersion preschools programs at all public school campuses. Yeah. Fantastic. I invite you also to share your personal or professional experiences around how you as Ohana, or how you in maybe the fourth quarter of last school year might have been innovative and have found ways to integrate Olalo Hawaiʻi, or perhaps even some of the upcoming concepts in your work and in your design with students. Thanks, Liz. We'll come back to you in a couple of slides. Our next concept is Kuanaʻike. And as shared earlier, there are 3 kumuhana or topics within Kuanaʻike. Kuanaʻike is about worldview and understanding the relationships between Akua, ʻāina, and Kanaka, and the importance of their connectivity. The first kumuhana or topic within Kuanaʻike is Ahupua. Ahupua is used as a metaphor for symbols for systems and cycles, and begins at kupu with an understanding the importance of and significance of cycles and systems. And then the hua stage is about advocating for pono stewardship of ʻāina. And so what you'll start to see as we move through each of these concepts and kumuhana topics is that in that kupu stage, there's an openness and an ability for every learner, for every teacher, to enter the phase in a place that connects to their own personal culture, heritage, experiences, and identity. The second kumuhana within Kuanaʻike is Vahipana. Vahipana is about understanding our sacred or storied places by knowing their traditional names and stories and how they've changed over time. At kupu, it begins with understanding the importance of and significance of names and stories. And then the hua stage is also about advocating for pono stewardship of ʻāina. Going the wrong way. The third and final kumuhana within Kuanaʻike is Mahalo and Honihi. Mahalo and Honihi are about contributions to the well-being of places and people. Kupu begins with understanding the importance of and significance of behaviors, practices, and protocols. And the hua stage is having a daily practice or routine of Mahalo and Honihi. COVID has allowed for us as a family to pause. Days were blazing by and we found ourselves caught up in the hustle and bustle of life, waking up early to get to where we needed to be, coming home late after long days of school or work and after extracurricular activities, and with little time to actually be at home and in our place. When the end of March hit and we found ourselves gifted back time that we lost in transit, we decided to use our early mornings to attend to our well-being as a family. We were ma'a, or used to waking up early, and we found gratitude in our ability to access the beach so easily. And so we woke up the same time as usual, and in what we thought was going to be physical exercise actually became a strengthened sense of connection and belonging to our place, Waimanalo, or Waimanalo Kuʻuʻaina Kilohana. We were able to stop and be present, to na and ho'olohe, to watch, to listen, to observe, to be one, to be in sync with our environment. To see the rising of the sun day in and day out, and to be thankful for new days and new beginnings. We began to notice what was happening in connection to our moon, and how on some days we could see the sun and moon at the same time, and others we could not. There was a time back in April when we could smell the limu before we even got to the beach. And much to our surprise, when we got there, the beach was completely covered, and it lasted and stayed there for over a week. We greeted the sun as it rose each morning, and in that learning space, and from this learning sources, we have watched the tides ebb and flow and adjusted our routes of workout and cleanups accordingly. And in all of that, we've experienced science, math, social studies, and language arts as it revealed itself naturally and organically in our new learning spaces.
And if you could just, before you move on, address how you handled the issue of some people wanting really specific lesson plans versus trying to craft something that would work for any person in any sort of setting. Someone asked about grade level lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of our working with the establishment of the Office of Hawaiian Education was that the role of our office switched. We formerly were seated under the Office of Curriculum Instruction and under the Office of Curriculum Instruction and Design. And so what we saw our role there was really helping to produce and to support curriculum. And while the Office of Hawaiian Education was established in 2015, it was moved under the Office of the Superintendent. And so we saw our role as an office shift towards systemic transformation and with a sub-role support of curriculum providing curriculum. And really the way that we look at developing curriculum is that it has to be specific to your context, and no longer can we look at prescribed curriculum. And so ʻāina Aloha was designed around these contents so that you all as educators could continue to be the experts of your content and use these concepts as a lens by which you might look at your content standards to contextualize or root those standards to Hawaii, to our place through Hawaiian language, worldview, and place. Mahalo for those questions. The third concept, oh, go ahead. I hear a click. Is that you, Liz?
Yeah, it kind of ties in with what you were saying, but will there be examples made available through this document?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our end goal after Board of Education approval, what you'll see is professional development, right? Making sure that we have a website that highlights some of the things that teachers are already doing, giving examples of other things that teachers can think about doing. One of the nice things that have come out of the pandemic is a saturation of Ike Hawaii content made available digitally. And so that's one of the things that we also continue to look at right now is how do we sift through all of the content that has been made available digitally through partnerships with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs or Kamehameha Schools, or other teachers who are just doing really great work in taking, leadership roles of, sharing place-based strategies or project-based strategies. And so it's how do we create that inventory, compile it in a way where it's user-friendly for teachers, and then give it back to teachers as additional resources. Mm-hmm.
Great, and there's nothing left in the chat, Ku'ulei, but you may just want to check the Menti real quick and see if there's anything you want to address there. I'm not sure if people have been adding to it.
There's a comment here around, like the idea of using a child's home as a classroom. We use that concept when we use constructivism and access children's previous knowledge. As an English language arts teacher, prior to beginning a reading, I discuss the intro with kids and allow them to discuss it. Absolutely. It's always important that students are able to see themselves in the learning that we design for them. And so ʻāina Aloha and allowing them to connect to their personal stories as students is one way for us to be able to design for learning and for them to think about seeing themselves. Mm-hmm. Honua is our third concept within ʻāina Aloha, and it is about sense of place and understanding that the land is our chief and we are its servants. He ali'i ka ʻāina, he kaua ke kanaka. The first kumuhana or topic within Honua is pono, and pono is about understanding the balance of akua, ʻāina, and kanaka, and being able to contribute to the balance and well-being of communities. The second kumuhana topic within Honua is kuleana. Most of us know kuleana to mean responsibility, but it also means accountability and privilege. When we look beyond the single definition of kuleana, we deepen our understanding of what it means from a Hawaiian perspective. It is our kuleana, our obligation, our right, our honor, and we will be held accountable. Honua's growth cycle begins for kuleana with understanding the significance and importance of kuleana, and in Hua, it is about being in service to the communities in which one belongs. For us at home, one of the things we wanted to start before in the past and we had to stop was because we were not able to tend to it properly and give it the care it deserved was making a mala. In April, we began to clear and prepare the space and planted a few things. We started small with some kalo and olana and other things that we already had in our yard. And as we worked together as a family, we created a shared kuleana that was fostered and nurtured over time. And from that time, my girls have taken the majority of kuleana for this space. They wake up every morning wanting to feed and talk to their plants, and they do the same in the afternoon and visit them periodically throughout the day. They have shared kuleana for something beyond themselves. And in this way, they practice malama, laulima, and olelo Hawaiʻi. And from that time in April until now in July, we've been able to see the reciprocity in this relationship through harvesting. And we've added some vegetables like zucchini, corn, and some flowers. And as a Makua, a parent, I get to stand back and watch how this space and from our ʻāina, they are growing as kanaka, but also that we have space to explore science and math in ways that now have purpose and meaning for them. And so we're going to take our final hanu and ha, as I've been able to share the three concepts of ʻāina aloha as well as the kumuhana that are all attached to them. Liz, are there any other mana'o in our chat?
No, I don't see any.
Perfect.
But speaking from a person who is not Hawaiian and who was a new educator here, if this is, a lot of information, I think the main thing that I take from your presentation is the importance of honoring language, land, and the worldview of Hawaii, and keeping this idea of the kukui growth cycle in our mind as a visual is really going to be helpful as we move through this.
I think the thing that I also want to say here is that this is not the optimal way for us to want to introduce ʻāina aloha, right? The way for us to introduce ʻāina aloha is for us to go outside, for us to feel the air, for us to taste the salt in the air and put our hands, hopefully kalima ilalo. And so I just appreciate this opportunity that you all are willing to be here and to listen and to share and exchange in this kind of way, as I know it's not the optimal space for us to be able to do this, and especially as we share about the importance of context for learning. And so as we see ourselves in this time, of the pandemic and looking at different models of teaching and learning, and we think about the stakeholders that we serve as educators, our haumana, our students, and our ohana, their families. I encourage us all to think about how we connect learning, much like flowers on a lei. ʻāina aloha offers us one way to think about rooting our content to Hawaii and to design for multiple learning environments, much like those we talked about today, and to engage multiple sources of knowledge. As we look to the future for ʻāina aloha within our educational system, we've completed 2 rounds of ʻāina aloha test sites and pilots in the spring and fall of 2019. Our intention was to give ʻāina aloha back to community to ask if we've included all of the mana'o that they shared in our convenings, was anything missing, and to determine its usability. After spring of 2019, we took the summer to take all of the feedback and make edits and refinements, which included a name change, some content changes, and changes to the formatting and layout. We gave it back to community in fall of 2019, and again are making some minor content changes and working with a student and teacher at Kalaheo High School to help us design ʻāina aloha in its 1.0 version. As we know, much like our growth cycle, there will come a time for regrowth. We hope to put ʻāina aloha before the Board of Education in January of 2021, and then we'll follow up by continuing to develop professional development opportunities for teachers, possibly looking at how do we create ʻāina aloha ACCN or courses that are integrating ʻāina aloha into core content that may lead to ʻāina aloha distinctions for students who take a series of courses. Student impact, and also looking at student impact data and how ʻāina aloha helps us to nurture their sense of ha and their cultural identities. Here are the resources that I was talking about. If you go to our OHE hub, check on our Ohe Hub. You'll see a link to all of our programs. And so within our office, we have Hawaiian Studies program, we have immersion program, Naho Pena'a'o. Here are some PD opportunities, and in particular, the Olelo Hawaiʻi PD opportunities that come out of our office, resources, and the support form. The support form is the Google form that you would fill out to request any services or posters, as someone was requesting earlier. This is also a link to our Hawaiian Studies, oops, that did not go, to our Hawaiian Studies matrix, which also shares a bunch of resources. And so I'll go back to that page if you guys want to take a picture of it or screenshot it, or I'm sure we can make this slideshow available to you all as well. And so as we near the end of our time today, I wanted to be able to use Menti one last time as a way for us to close our space by sharing one word about how we feel about ʻāina aloha. And so if you might go to menti.com, enter the code 759575. And then you should be able to enter one word. And this will create a word cloud for us to see. Oh, mahalo, grateful. And so as we all know, a word cloud, the more times that a word shows up the bigger the word and the text means the more times, the more people are saying the same thing. Oh my God. Lots of gratitude. That word is getting bigger. Mahalo is on there as well, so I'm sure that would have been bigger as well. Eleu, hopeful, inspired. And so as we continue to see our word cloud populate, I'm going to invite Jody back Elizabeth back, as I think she has some closing statements for us on behalf of HSTA. And I'll come back to our word cloud. I think it was just changing.
Okay, thank you. So someone asked in the chat to share my own experience a little bit. And so I just wanted to say, that I came to Hawaii in 2014. I worked at a rural school on the Big Island, Ka'u, and was just really in a huge culture shock. I came from Alaska, and originally California is where I was born and raised. And right off the bat, I was tasked with going to the Kahua program for all new educators, whether you were in Hawaii your whole life or whether you were moving here from the mainland. And basically at first it seemed like just an overload and a lot of extra work, but now in retrospect, I valued that experience so much, being able to take field trips around the places where I was teaching, to be connected with the kupuna there and hear the stories of the land, understanding where the students, stories, visions, culture came from made me connect with them a lot more. And I guess the main thing that I learned in that first 3 years was that I really, on this growth chart, I was just the kupu or the liko, I knew nothing. And what I really had to do was open up and learn from the students in order to build the relationships that were going to allow us to learn anything in the classroom. And so by implementing this, some of the more practical things that I've done are just making them the teachers for me, translating some of, the pidgin, the Hawaiian language, the English, talking about the different modes of formality. I'm an English teacher, and so that's, communication was foremost at the forefront. I also taught some art, and so incorporating things like using the Lahala brushes for painting, and then doing some compare and contrast with modern day techniques. working with Kapa, and it was just a way for me to be able to bridge this gap between my knowledge and the students' knowledge and ways of understanding. So that program was funded by Kamehameha Schools, and unfortunately it, like everything else, lost money and went away. But I would really encourage people to, when they're just getting here, to reach out to the people who know the land and know the culture, know the community, and really get all the stories that you can. I also was really lucky to be accepted to go to the HA program in Waimea. And so I was able to work on the fish ponds down in Kiholo Bay. And then when I applied with some of my colleagues for this ʻāina Aloha grant, we got to see the fish ponds and work on it a little bit closer to home. And so the past year has been a real growth for me because I started realizing the lessons that my students were learning in social studies class, learning about Native Hawaii and ancient Hawaii. The stories that they were learning in those history books were right down the road from me. And just having that connection made things so much more relevant, even for me as a teacher. So I'm just, I guess Ha and ʻāina Aloha was a way for me to grow as an educator so that I could be successful with the students here. And so I really feel like, although it may seem overwhelming at first to new educators to be in such a place of culture shock, this is what we need. This is the discussion that's happened between the educators and the students and the people like Kuʻulei and the great community members and teachers that are willing to teach us, because otherwise I would have been lost in the dark. So that's my 2 cents. And now I have to tell you about this last slide. Are we on the last slide, Kuʻulei?
Yes,
okay.
We are.
So yeah, it's just again giving you resources. We have a bit.ly for the HSTA ʻāina Aloha, and so there's some resources for that. But also we really would appreciate getting your thoughts on this session, some feedback. And so if you could take a couple minutes to fill that out, we would appreciate it too. I am also on the Human and Civil Rights Committee for HSTA. I'm also a head rep at my school. And I just feel so grateful, like, our word poem showed, to have these mentors surrounding me in different capacities through HSTA, through ʻāina Aloha, even through, DOE. Just the gathered knowledge is really just supporting me as a new educator here, and I think making me a more successful educator here. So anyways, all that to say, HSTA office hours sessions are going to be more, and we'll have several different topics that I hope will help out new educators and experienced educators, and just having a place for us to share stories, build a community, and that community is so integral, I think, in getting the support you need as a teacher in such tough times. So if you are a new educator, please also check out the hsta.org/shine star resources, and that has some other things for you to check out too. I believe this is the wrap up of our session, but I hate to be hogging the show at the very end. So Ku'ulei, I'm gonna turn it back to you and ask that you please give our closing remarks. And thank you so much for being willing to share your knowledge with me and my coworkers. And you've just made my educational experience here really rich.
Thank you, Liz, for sharing your story with all of us. Yeah, and I really just leave us with our closing word cloud that I think sums up certainly how you all are feeling given the size of these words here, and certainly what's in my na'au, as I have been able to share with you some stories about ʻāina Aloha and the ways in which ʻāina Aloha has revealed itself in my home during the past couple of months. And so with that, we say aloha ahui ho, mahalo.